Anne Blyth, the girl who played Hollywood's most hated daughter. She was 17 years old when she played one of the most poisonous daughters in movie history, a teenager so convincing as a cold-blooded killer that audiences reportedly booed her at premieres. Off-screen, she was the opposite, soft-spoken, devoutly religious, and nicknamed Angelic Annie by the very same magazines that couldn't believe someone so sweet could play someone so cruel. That actress was Anne Blyth, and on June 24, 2026, she passed away at her home in Rancho Santa Fe, California, at the age of 98, just under 2 months before her 99th birthday. Today, we're looking back at the remarkable life of one of the last surviving stars of Hollywood's golden studio system. Blyth's death was confirmed by her daughter, Eileen McNulty, who said her mother died peacefully, of natural causes, surrounded by family. Local Los Angeles reporter George Pinacchio, who had a personal relationship with the actress, broke the news to the public, noting that she'd lived a career that started almost unbelievably early, performing on the radio at just 6 years old, appearing on Broadway at 12, and landing her first film role at 14. Tributes rolled in quickly. Actress Illeana Douglas shared a memory of spending time with Blyth on a Turner Classic Movies cruise, calling her performance as Veda in Mildred Pierce iconic, and describing Blyth and her daughters as warm and lovely in person, a far cry from the venomous character that made her famous. So who was the woman behind that infamous role? Let's go back to the beginning. Anne Blyth was born Anne Marie Blyth in 1928 in Mount Kisco, New York. Not long after entering show business, she quietly dropped the E from both her first and last name, and the stage name Anne Blyth stuck for the rest of her life. She was a prodigy in the truest sense. By 6, she was already working in radio. By 12, she'd made it to Broadway. And by 14, she was appearing in her first film. Her early movie work included light-hearted musical fare, things like Chip Off the Old Block and Bowery to Broadway, often dancing alongside a young Donald O'Connor, years before he'd become a household name in Singin' in the Rain. But behind the scenes, Blyth's childhood wasn't without real hardship. Not long before her breakout role, her mother died of cancer. Blyth would later say that in the lonely stretches of her early career, when she couldn't land a job, it was her mother's encouragement that kept pushing her forward. Losing that voice right as her career was about to explode was a quiet tragedy behind an otherwise dazzling rise. That rise was about to reach a new level entirely because of one film and one character that would define her for the rest of her life. In 1945, Warner Brothers borrowed the teenage Anne Blyth on a loan-out deal to play a role that would change everything. Veda, the spoiled, manipulative daughter of Joan Crawford's title character in Mildred Pierce, directed by Michael Curtiz, the same director behind Casablanca. The film was adapted from a James M. Cain novel in the same dark, morally tangled tradition as Double Indemnity. Crawford played a hard-working single mother who builds a restaurant empire from nothing, all to try to win the approval and love of her ungrateful daughter. Blyth's Veda took that ingratitude to a genuinely shocking place, seducing her mother's second husband and ultimately shooting him in a jealous rage. It's hard to overstate how effective Blyth was in the part. The Hollywood Reporter's original review called her understanding of the role remarkable for someone so young, crediting Joan Crawford's own star power as the only thing keeping the film from being stolen out from under her by a teenager. Audiences, by some accounts, despised Veda so intensely that they'd hiss and boo whenever Blyth appeared on screen, the highest possible compliment for a villain. The film earned Crawford the Academy Award for Best Actress, an award she famously accepted from her bed, sick with a fever, rather than attend the ceremony in person. And it earned Anne Blyth, at just 17 years old, an Oscar nomination of her own for Best Supporting Actress. It was a stunning debut into serious dramatic acting for someone who'd spent her early career in cheerful musical numbers. And it set up a fascinating contradiction that would follow her for years. The press loved painting her as incorruptible, as angelic Annie, as the girl who was somehow immune to Hollywood's usual scandals, even while her most famous role was a murderer. But almost as soon as her career reached this new height, it nearly ended completely. Just days after wrapping production on Mildred Pierce, Blyth was in a sledding accident near Lake Arrowhead, California, and broke her back. She later described the moment vividly, recalling the feeling of flying down an icy hill, then a sudden crash, and the sickening thud of landing hard on her back. The injury was serious enough that doctors weren't sure she'd walk normally again, let alone continue a physically demanding acting career. Blyth spent 7 months in a full-body cast, followed by another 7 months in a wheelchair. It was a brutal, isolating stretch for a teenager who'd been performing in front of audiences since early childhood. She later credited her Roman Catholic faith with getting her through it, saying that as her fast-paced world slowed to almost nothing, she found unexpected moments of grace in the stillness. She recovered, and when she came back, Hollywood put her right back into more edgy roles. A love interest in Swell Guy, a role opposite Burt Lancaster in the gritty prison drama Brute Force, and a turn as Mickey Rooney's love interest in the boxing picture Killer McCoy. She even appeared alongside Charles Boyer as a woman in love with a suspected murderer in A Woman's Vengeance. Proof that, despite nearly losing her career before it truly began, Blyth had no plans to fade quietly back into ingenue roles. But Hollywood was about to discover an entirely different side of her talent. By the early 1950s, Anne Blyth had transformed into one of MGM's leading musical stars. And this time, audiences got to hear the voice that had started it all back on the radio at age 6. In 1951, she starred opposite the operatic tenor Mario Lanza in The Great Caruso, playing his wife. Her lyric soprano paired beautifully with his powerful tenor, and the film introduced the now classic song The Loveliest Night of the Year. The pairing was popular enough that the two were set to reunite for The Student Prince, but Lanza, notoriously difficult to work with, dropped out after recording his vocal tracks, and another actor stepped in to lip-sync the songs Lanza had already laid down. Blyth went on to headline a string of MGM musicals through the mid-1950s, including Rose Marie and Kismet, with Howard Keel, the latter directed by the legendary Vincente Minnelli. Her film career during this stretch put her opposite some of the biggest leading men in Hollywood, including Bing Crosby, Gregory Peck, and Tyrone Power. One of her more unusual roles came in 1948's Mr. Peabody and the Mermaid, where she played, quite literally, a mermaid brought home by actor William Powell, a fantasy role that showed off yet another side of her range. And then, in one of the more memorable Oscars moments of the era, a pregnant Anne Blyth performed the song Secret Love at the Academy Awards ceremony, visibly expecting her son Timothy just weeks before he was born, singing openly about love that's no longer secret, while carrying a secret of her own that the whole world could see. In 1953, Blyth married Dr. James McNulty, a physician, and the brother of comedian and singer Dennis Day. Together, they had 5 children and remained married for over 5 decades, until his death in 2007. Professionally, Blyth's relationship with the studios wasn't always smooth. At one point, she refused to take on another bad girl role in a planned film called Abandoned, and was placed on unpaid suspension as punishment for turning it down. It's a small but telling detail. The actress who'd played one of cinema's great villains had grown tired of being typecast as one. Her film career wound down faster than almost anyone expected. Her final feature film came in 1957, The Helen Morgan Story, co-starring a young Paul Newman, again directed by Michael Curtiz, the same man who'd launched her into stardom with Mildred Pierce more than a decade earlier. She was reportedly considered for the lead role in The Three Faces of Eve around this same time, a part that ultimately went to Joanne Woodward, who won the Best Actress Oscar for it. Blyth chose to step away from movies instead, before she'd even turned 30. But stepping away from film didn't mean stepping away from performing. After leaving feature films, Blyth kept working. She performed a nightclub act in Las Vegas, appeared in regional theater, and made guest appearances on television for decades. She popped up on shows like Wagon Train and a memorable episode of The Twilight Zone, playing a Hollywood star mysteriously frozen in time. She returned twice to the medical drama Quincy, M.E., in the late 70s and early 80s, and made her final on-screen appearance in a 1985 episode of Murder, She Wrote. In 1960, Hollywood formally recognized her contributions with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Away from the screen entirely, those close to her described a woman who quietly gave back, a philanthropist who insisted on answering her own fan mail personally, rather than leaving it to assistants. Her family shared that she spent her later years enjoying simple pleasures, gardening, knitting, and oil painting, often giving away her artwork as gifts to friends and family, rather than keeping it for herself. It's a strikingly gentle final chapter for an actress whose most famous role was about as far from gentle as Hollywood could offer. Anne Blyth's career is a genuine rarity. A child performer who became a teenage Oscar nominee, playing one of cinema's most memorable villains, then reinvented herself as a musical leading lady, then walked away from Hollywood entirely on her own terms, all before the age most people are settling into a career at all. She outlived nearly every other star of that studio system era, and by the time of her passing, she was one of the last living links to the golden age of MGM and Warner Brothers musicals and melodramas. If you enjoyed this look back at Anne Blyth's life and career, let me know in the comments which of her films you'd want to revisit first, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stars who built classic Hollywood.